Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. With the release of Set 4, there's a lot of players returning to the game that may be overwhelmed by all of the new information that's been presented to them. We're here to help that learning phase, so today we'll be covering 10 items that you should try out in patch 10.19. We'll go over some of the better options for damage, utility, and defense. With that said, let's get to it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To start off, we have Bramble Vest coming in at number 10. Bramble Vest barely manages to squeeze itself into the top 10 for one really important reason: it's good against Infinity Edge and Assassins. Infinity Edge is both ridiculously good right now in the meta and quite common, so securing yourself a Bramble Vest for your frontline can be a good way to counter it. For those unfamiliar with the effect of Bramble Vest, it will negate the bonus damage from a critical strike. This is quite helpful considering Infinity Edge will bump a champion to 100% critical strike chance. While your champion will still take normal damage, it does help them from getting one shot by a ridiculous crit. So who should you be giving Bramble Vest to? Most often it's going to be on a frontliner, so common options include Sejuani or Aatrox. Riven is also a great choice, as keeping her alive as long as possible will increase the odds of you winning a round. Bramble Vest will prevent her from getting one shot by Jhin or Talon and will allow her to freely jump around the field. While you could in theory give Bramble Vest to a backline carry, it's less useful to do given that you want other defensive items on them. Overall, stick to giving Bramble to a frontline champion that you want to keep alive as long as possible. Let's move on to the next item, which is Morellonomicon. It's coming in as the number 9 item on today's list. Morellonomicon has somewhat limited use in Set 4 since there's overall better items that you can be giving to your magic damage champions. But the main purpose for running Morellonomicon is not so much its damage, but the application of healing reduction. That said, Sunfire Cape can be slightly more consistent at applying healing reduction since it's only tied to proximity around the champion wearing it, whereas Morello's only procs during a spell's effect. It's still worth considering picking up Morellonomicon, at least for specific champions. For example, this item is insanely effective on Morgana, as her ability has a very large AoE that lasts for a decent amount of time. This means that you can easily apply healing reduction to a lot of champions. The same goes for Sejuani, who also has a very large area of effectability. Basically, there's enough healing going on currently in the meta that having a way to apply healing reduction is very useful. Sunfire Cape is easier to just slap on a frontline or assassin, but Morellonomicon on the right champion is super strong, so try it out on any champion with a lot of AoE. We recommend Sejuani, Morgana, Kennen, and Ahri. Next up, we have the item coming in at number 8, Giant Slayer. Compared to Infinity Edge, you're not going to prioritize nor see Giant Slayer quite as much. The reason we're listing Giant Slayer as an item to try is that, well, there's a lot of beefy champions in Set 4. Most of the frontline champions have a decent health pool, but we're specifically talking about brawlers. Brawlers aren't played in every composition, but they are common enough to warrant picking up Giant Slayer for your carry. The reason is that Giant Slayer will do extra damage to a champion that has a high maximum health. And by extra damage, we mean a lot of extra damage, as it goes from a 10% increase to a 90% increase. This makes it incredibly valuable on fast attacking champions when dealing with frontlines that have a lot of health to chew through. Ashe, for example, gets a lot of value from Giant Slayer. Duelists innately attack quickly if you have the trait active, so having a Giant Slayer on one of them is quite effective as well. We won't recommend that you always prioritize making a Giant Slayer every game because it does have a limited amount of champions that you'll want it on. But if you're scouting in the mid game, see a few players running high health frontlines, and you have a good high attack speed option for Giant Slayer, go for it. Moving along, we have one of the new items coming in at number 7, Gargoyle Stoneplate. Stoneplate is just an all-around good defensive item. There's nothing too special about it, as the unit wearing it just gets extra armor and magic resist for every enemy targeting it. The main thing that makes this item interesting is that it does open up the possibility of running a solo frontliner. It does pose a risk, of course, but it can be done. Any frontline champion can use Stoneplate, so there's no need to prioritize it for one champion compared to another. But there are a few champions that you'll play as a solo frontliner more than others. Examples include Tahm Kench, Garen, Sejuani, and Shen. Experiment and see what works and what doesn't, but keep in mind you need to be wary of any Zephyrs if you're running only one champion as your frontliner. Guardian Angel is up next and comes in as the number 6 item for today. Good old reliable Guardian Angel. Even in the new set, it's still a top defensive item, as, well, you can't beat having a champion come back after dying once. In general, though, it does take a backseat to a few other defensive items, but it's not uncommon for players to prioritize running at least one Guardian Angel every single game. As for who to give it to, it kinda depends. It can go on a backline carry, a frontliner, or an assassin. For the most part, trying to keep it on any champion that you really want to have either stay alive longer, like Talon or Riven, or a champion you need to have cast their ability at least once, like Sejuani. It's also great for any channeled abilities that may persist through it, such as Kennen. Overall, Guardian Angel is still a great item and definitely still worth making. Up next, we have Spear of Shojin coming in at number 5. Shojin was given a mini rework in set 4 as it no longer increases mana gain by a percent amount, nor does it only happen after the champion using it has casted their spell. It will now provide a flat 5 mana per auto attack straight out of the gate. While 5 mana is relatively low, it is gaining the mana right away instead of having to wait for the champion to cast. One of the biggest reasons as to why Shojin is useful is due to the Enlightened trait. Enlightened increases the mana generation of its champions, which also applies to Shojin. While it may not be a huge increase for just 2 Enlightened, the value does go up once you're at 4 or 6 of the trait. And to get slightly more specific, Morgana is amazing with Shojin because of the fact that you want her to cast more often and she's already Enlightened. But she's not the only champion that you want to give it to, as there's a wide range of utility champions that benefit from casting more often, such as Jinx, Janna, and Zillion. Other damage champions besides Morgana that can use it well include Nidalee, Ahri, and Aphelios. Also, it does still work with Runan's Hurricane. It's not going to be a common thing to pair with them, but certainly worth keeping in mind. Alright, let's move on to the number 4 item on today's list, Dragon's Claw. Dragon's Claw is an actual item in set 4. This is partly because it was buffed from 50% magic resist to 60%, but the much larger reason for it being useful is that in this set, there is a ton of magic damage. There's definitely still physical damage, but the majority of damage is going to be from magic. Whether it's from frontliners like Aatrox or Sejuani, or just a backliner poking at you like Teemo, you're going to see magic damage more often in the damage charts than physical. Dragon's Claw does take a bit of a backseat to Mystic, as that trait will provide you magic resist for your whole team, but if you have a champion that you really don't want to die to magic damage, Dragon's Claw is the item for you. Now we're going to move into our top 3. Up first, we have Sunfire Cape coming in at number 3. Sunfire Cape is another new item in set 4, although it's more or less just a reworked red buff. But instead of the champion having to use auto attacks to get its effect, it instead happens periodically to any champion within 2 hexes. Straight away, you can likely guess this is an amazing item for frontline champions, and you'd be correct. But it's also useful on assassins or shades as they can apply it to the backline. Overall, Sunfire Cape is going to do more early game than late game, as the damage does fall off a bit. If you manage to get a beefy frontliner early on, like a Garen 2 or Tahm Kench 2, then slapping Sunfire Cape on them can often lead to a win streak. With all that said, it is important to remember that Sunfire has healing reduction to enemies affected by it. This means that while the damage may not be impactful later on in the game, it's still useful due to the fact that it has the healing reduction. So while we recommend making it early game instead of later on, it's still an okay item to make if you have the components for it in the mid game. Next up is Infinity Edge, coming in as the number 2 item for today. We talked about it a few times already, so it shouldn't be a surprise to see Infinity Edge rated highly. It may just be doing well because of the meta, but overall Infinity Edge is the most common item that players prioritize currently. This is due to the amount of damage output it has, not only by essentially making the champion have a 100% crit chance, but also now converts any additional critical strike chance above 100% into more critical damage. This means on champions like Talon or other assassins, you can increase their overall damage by a large margin with Infinity Edge. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, Bramble Vest can negate the extra damage of critical strikes, but since not every unit is going to have one, you'll still get a lot of value from this item. Another reason as to why Infinity Edge is great is how many champions can actually use it. Talon, Jhin, Ashe, Warwick, Zed, and Akali all do well with Infinity Edge. And that actually covers a wide range of potential comps, so you can see how building an early Infinity Edge is great to do, as you're not limiting yourself into only 1 or 2 comps. You've actually got quite a few to choose from. And for the last item on today's list, we have Quicksilver coming in at number 1. Surprise! The top item to use in the current meta is none other than Quicksilver. Before we get into the reason as to why we recommend this item, it should be pointing out that it did receive a buff going into set 4. The duration was increased from 10 seconds up to 12, so the champion you give it to will be immune to crowd control for just a bit longer. So why is Quicksilver so good? Honestly, it's not even that it's good, it's just necessary. Set 4 has a lot, and we mean a lot, of crowd control. And not just stuns. There's blinds, knockups, displacement abilities, sleeps, and attack speed slowing effects. All of those get negated by the immunity that Quicksilver provides. That means that your backline carry that you really need to keep auto-attacking will do so unhindered for at least 12 seconds. Or if you really want a frontline champion to not get crowd control, like say your Set, Riven, or Sejuani, then giving them a Quicksilver is quite valuable as well. Basically, not having a Quicksilver on your carry or important champion is kind of like rolling the dice when they get crowd controlled in one way or another. It's not a matter of if they'll get CC'd, but when. Lastly, it also means you can safely corner a backline champion. No more worrying about Aatrox pulling them in, well, at least not until the immunity wears off from Quicksilver. Alright, that's all that we have for you today, folks. As we said, there's a large learning phase at the beginning of a new set, so hopefully these 10 item recommendations will help. Let us know in the comment section below what items you've been having the most success with, and if there's any you think should have been on the list that we missed. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.